Hey everybody, we're the good doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I'm Dr. Kristen.
You are ever so welcome to our content. If you don't know us, we're two doctors. We have PhDs in social science, and we absolutely are obsessed with talking about culture, in part because of who we are and in part because of our academic training. But we love talking about culture, all varieties, all shapes, all forms, all over the world, hence why we're here. We are empathy educators, which means that we think talking about the diversity of human life and culture and society around the world in small and large doses can help us build our empathy and also work towards, really just digging into what it means to be inclusive, what it actually means to be inclusive. And that is the passion that drives us forward. And that is what guides our YouTube channel for the most part. Sometimes it's rants about The Handmaid's Tale, but we love to talk to each other, as you will gather shortly, but we also love having conversations with other folks about all of these things. So make sure wherever you are engaging with this that you like and subscribe and comment, tell us your thoughts, ask us your questions. We really do want to make this a conversation because we feel like that's the best way to get towards that beautiful goal of being more empathetic and inclusive.
A little while ago, we realized that one of the words that everyone is a little bit afraid to say out loud is colonization. And so we decided to explore a little bit of why we're afraid to say that word and identify as it and engage with its legacy. And we started and honestly, I'll just be really frank. We realized this from watching Black Panther and hearing Sherry call somebody like a white person a colonizer. And we were like, oh yeah, we are.
Oh, yeah.
We should look at that more. So we're on the Colonizers World Tour for 2020, 2021, probably forever, because we're not going to run out of countries. And even when we do, there's so much more to learn for all of them. And we are looking at different countries that have been colonized because, spoiler alert, there's only like 4 on the planet that haven't been in some way, shape, or form. So there's a lot to work with here. And we are looking at how the legacy of colonization, and for a lot of places, the overlapping legacies of colonization, affects their culture, how they relate with the rest of the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this month, we are in June, and we've decided to take a particular look at the global realities of queer folk around the world in 2021. And so there's lots and lots of lenses through which we can come to all these countries. But in particular, this month, we're looking at LGBTQIA+ and what that kind of looks like. Today, we are talking about Uganda.
Today we are talking about Uganda. Dr. Kristen, what did you know about Uganda before we did this? It's good. Spoiler alert, folks. It's a lot longer answer than mine.
I knew a lot. And some of that is because I've been particularly interested in the British legacy of colonization for a long time now through my work in Kenya and India, and also a little bit in South Africa and how they overlapped with some of the stuff that happened down there. So I've been very interested in Uganda for a little while. I also have the privilege of working with an international nonprofit that supports a mission, an education nonprofit that is just incredible outside of Kampala in Uganda. And I've gotten the chance to watch the executive director there, whose name is Millie, just be the greatest woman any of us have ever met.
Ever. We love Millie.
And if you would love to send children to school in Uganda after watching this video, we're going to include a link to donate directly to Millie in the show notes, because she can always use money for feeding kids. So I've known a lot. The culture is not radically different from Kenya, in the same way that, like, there's times I feel like, the culture in Northern Ireland is not radically different than England or radically different than the Republic. There's nuances everywhere, but Kenya and Uganda often are matched. And there's reasons for it. I haven't gotten there yet. I was supposed to go in the 2020 before the panini, and I can't wait to go as soon as it is safe right now. it would be taking resources around COVID from folks that that are desperate for resources, because vaccine distribution has been disproportionate. But as soon as I can't wait to go. So I'll be really honest, almost everything we're going to cover today, I knew, just because the basics aren't hard for me to access. But Dr. Erin, I know that our passions in international exploration do not overlap all that often in the past. So what did you know about Uganda before we got here?
Heretofore, my entire experience with Uganda was what I learned about the dictator Idi Amin from The Last King of Scotland, because I have been in love with James McAvoy for a very long time. And I'll be brutally honest, that's the reason why I watched that movie. And also, I think it's Forrest Whitaker. Forrest Whitaker plays Idi Amin, and he's phenomenal. I think he won an Oscar.
Yeah, he won an Academy Award for it.
He won an Oscar for it. Yeah, it's a brilliant film. And, that didn't prompt me to learn more about Uganda, sadly. But now was my time. I also learned that they have a lot of gorillas there. And I learned that recently, and I was excited about it. And they have half the world's mountain gorillas live in Uganda. So that was literally it. And so I'm going to do the demographic-y bit, reading from our notes, and then Dr. Kristen's going to get into the meat of Uganda, because Africa is way more her jam than mine, and it is a beloved place in her heart and soul. So we will let her do the heavy lifting on Uganda. So without further ado, let's go to the map in case you don't know where we are. Uganda is a landlocked country in East Central Africa, west of Kenya, east of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and it is slightly more than 2 times the size of the state of Pennsylvania. You know what? The CIA World Bank of Facts is just delightful with why it needs to tell me how world countries are shaped in relation to American states. I love that they know Americans just don't travel. So they're like, what do people understand the size of Florida? They don't know. So it is slightly more than 2 times the size of the state of Pennsylvania. The population is just shy of 45 million humans. The capital city is now Kampala. As when it was a British protectorate, it was Entebbe. Official languages, they have English, which is taught in schools and used in courts of law and by most newspapers and some radio broadcasts. Ganda or Luganda is the most widely used of the Niger-Congo languages, and the language most often used in the capital. We have other Niger-Congo languages as well, Nilo-Saharan languages, and then Swahili is also an official language in Uganda, and Arabic is used as well. The ethnic indigenous breakdown, kind of Uganda was mashed together out of a lot of traditional kingdoms from that part of the continent. The 2 biggest were Baganda and Bunyoro. To this day, a lot of clans still make up kind of the ethnic makeup of Uganda. Baganda is the largest ethnic group, and then we have a whole host of others, including Banyako, Basanga, Bakiga, Itetso, Langi, I'm mispronouncing them, but I wanted to say them out loud, Bagisu, Akoli, Lubara, lots of ethnic groups mixed in there because the Brits just kind of papered Uganda together. It was great. The currency is the Ugandan shilling, which you have to have 3,527 of them to make up $1 US. The system of government currently is the Republic of Uganda and has a presidential republic with 134 districts. Again, we have a mixed legal system of English common law and customary law. They just had a general election in February 2021, where President Yoweri Museveni was reelected. He has been president since 1986. This is another place that has a history of coups. It does not have the coup culture that Fiji has, but it does have quite a history of coups, especially after independence. Religious breakdown we'll get more into with Dr. Kristen, but just to give you some numbers, it is mostly Protestant. 45%, with a big population of Anglican, Pentecostal, born again, and evangelical coming in at 11%. Again, colonizing, it makes sense that it's Protestant with the Brits. We have Roman Catholic, 39%, and then 13% Muslim, and then the rest fall into other categories. So that's our demographic breakdown, the who's it's and the was it's. Dr. Kristen, take it away. What would you like our lovely viewers to know about Uganda?
I can't wait to go. So one of the things that is really fascinating about Uganda over some other places in East Africa is that the port, Kampala, is the capital, is in this very fun geographic place where it allowed for a lot more travel between some of the British colonies than some other places. Like, for instance, chapati, which is this massively popular flat bread type thing that's eaten in a lot of Africa, feels a lot like roti, which is what's in India. And like chapati is served in India and roti is served in Africa, and those kind of going back and forth. And chapati is a staple of Ugandan food. This one particular thing they have, which is called a Rolex, is fried eggs wrapped in chapati. Yes. Why are we going against carbs? So one of the best ways I always think of to, and we've talked about this in other videos, to understand culture is to understand food. And so one of the basis in most sub-Saharan African countries have something that is like a dumpling or flour paste or something. In a lot of places that I've gotten to travel, it's called ugali. And in Uganda, I'm double checking the spelling because I just keep calling it ugali, which is not correct. And in Uganda, it's called posha. And essentially it's because people don't need utensils to eat a lot of beans or tomatoes or spinach or the other vegetables that grow. And they make this dumpling as the main utensil. And it is eaten everywhere and delightful. It's a country full of the colonization still. We need to just be really honest about that. Uganda has made a lot of international headlines recently for its laws against homosexuality. President Obama spoke out against them directly in a very rare for President Obama direct slap at a, not necessarily a strong ally, but we certainly didn't hate Uganda. And so when they started talking about those laws, I think it surprised some people that he was really clear that this was not something he approved of. So I'm going to park that conversation for just a second, and we're going to talk just a little bit about some of the other fun things about Uganda I want everybody to know. People are super, super warm from everything I've ever heard. But just like most post-colonial situations that have a culture of coups and a lot of dictators, Idi Amin was not a great dude. And that legacy continues into a whole lot of infrastructure issues and a lot of inequity and a lot of structural problems. HIV/AIDS is rampant, feels potentially a little bit too dramatic, but there are areas of the country where it wouldn't be. Healthcare is difficult to achieve. Clean water is difficult to achieve. Lots of the things that make the commercials where you're supposed to sponsor a child and they want you to feel really, really bad for the kid, and so they guilt you into giving that money. A lot of that's true in Uganda. If you watched our video on Queen of Katwe, then you saw some of just the realities of growing up in Uganda. And almost none of it is based on personal choices that somebody not in power has made. Uganda is one of those countries that people are where they are because a lot of poor decisions were made for them and not really anything they had control over. But it is, whenever I get a chance to talk to my Millie or talk to other folks I know who live and work in and around Kampala, it's just one of those places where I'm like, it's full of so many delightfully passionate people who could get so much done if there wasn't all this other post-colonial dictator junk in their way.
Yeah.
And so it's one of the mantras of how I see most of sub-Saharan Africa is that the people closest to, and the world, to be honest, the people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And as you learn more and more about Uganda, that will kind of come up. So now we have to get to the gay stuff.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about this a little bit more in tomorrow's video, but I want to touch on it now because it's so ubiquitous with the understanding of Uganda in the international imagination right now. There's a lot of conversation around the fact that Uganda is legally homophobic, in that it is same-sex acts are criminalized in Uganda. That was even enforced in a law that was passed only about a month ago. And there's lots of chatter that it is because that the West brought homosexuality with it, or that it's being fought this vociferously because of a lot of money from American evangelicals, and that it is the church that made it homophobic. Or there's lots and lots of people pointing in a lot of different directions as to why Uganda in particular is fighting this particular fight this loudly. And in my very expert opinion, the answer is yes. Yes, and.
We are fans of the both and answer.
Was there homophobia in tribal Uganda? Maybe. I don't know. I have not encountered any deep or really intense discussion about sexuality in tribal Uganda prior to colonialization. It's out there, I'm sure. I just haven't run across it.
Yeah, from what I found, it's very similar to what we've talked about in a lot of other colonized places, in that there was, a greater understanding for homosexuality and gender fluidity and acceptance in some of the tribes and clans prior to contact. So I think it's similar, and I don't think Uganda was like exceptionally homophobic pre-contact. That is not something that I came across in my stuff. So
I would doubt it. And my guess is that there might have been pockets of folks that were, because that's life. And that then when the colonizers came in, they were able to exploit that.
Yeah. And we have a great article linked below that I read in The Guardian. It's from a couple of years ago. But it's the idea that African homosexuality was a colonial import is a myth.
Yes.
And so it breaks down some of that, and it talks like broadly more about Africa than specifically Uganda. But Uganda was very similar to everywhere else in that a lot of indigenous places have more gender and sexuality fluid understandings.
But it wasn't, but the homophobia might be an import for sure.
Right.
But there's to me, for it to change a culture, that there had to be a both and there had to be somebody powerful there that wasn't a big fan. And the thing is, like, right now there's 50 subsects of like 50 identified anthropological subcultures within Uganda. Can you imagine before colonization how many kingdoms there were, and all the, like, we don't know because we didn't write them down because the British burned it all. Like, so my best guess is that they were humans.
Yes.
And so
that's crazy.
And so that there was as wide of an understanding of this stuff as there are humans, and that's just kind of what it looked like. Now, the particular version of Christianity that came with the British government, which was a very particular Victorian conservative Anglicanism, was decidedly homophobic, as was the version of Methodism that came, as was the version of Catholicism that came. And when those all kind of got there, Uganda is one of the places where the local religions were wiped out more than were absorbed into Christianity. So there's not quite as much, a word I've used before on this, syncretism, as in a lot of other places. Uganda and Kenya as well, and Malawi as well. A lot of the British stuff. Like, I'll tell you, I went to a Church of Scotland service in southern India, where if I closed my eyes and I wasn't sweating, I was in Aberdeen. So it is like they didn't do a lot of adaptations as much. When the British went, they brought the whole, it's like they just built an IKEA culture. Like, everybody gets the same thing. So that's one of the reasons that Uganda is kind of the way it is that there wasn't a lot of native Ugandanness allowed to hang out. So you've got that. Then you've got that the British government system in its colonies absolutely hates things that are different. And part of the colonial message was for there to be traditional marriages and traditional procreation and traditional kind of ways of understanding that. And I'm using traditional in a lot of inverted commas, because it is not necessarily traditional where they were, but it was traditional, or even honestly traditional to Britain. But in their mind, it was. And so part of the British colonial export was a nuclear family. And anybody who falls outside a nuclear family is wrong, sinful, etc. So you see this even now in Uganda, the legacy of that. And then we do need to add in the money from American evangelicals who see Uganda for a number of reasons I can't quite have time to unpack here, and Northern Irish evangelicals as well, Irish evangelicals and British evangelicals, see Uganda as a place that they can make their ideal of a Christian nation. And their ideal of a Christian nation is absolutely no abortions, absolutely no homosexuality. Everybody goes to a Christian school and everybody makes a faith confession. And they seem to believe that Uganda is a place where that can happen. So they pour a lot of money into that happening. That is not the only reason why these laws keep getting passed. I want to be clear. Like, it's not just the Americans. It's not just the history. It's everything. It's everything. And so that's incredibly important to remember. And we'll get into it a little bit more tomorrow. So I don't want anybody to kind of think of Uganda as the place that hates gays for the simple fact that it's more complicated than that. It is very famous for making headlines for its laws. Yeah. And when we're talking about global queer life, we can't not talk about Uganda. But there's also queer life in Uganda. And despite the laws, queer folks are always going to exist, have existed, will continue to exist, regardless of what mainstream culture would like to believe. And again, we'll unpack that all a little bit more in tomorrow's documentary, which is entirely about the life of an activist around the original 2013 law.
All right. So what remains for us is a brief history of said colonization. Before we wrap up today's video, we talked about it. It was the Brits. We had Arab traders moving inland from the Indian Ocean by the 1830s. By the 1860s, we had British explorers who were looking for the source of the Nile. They were shortly followed by British Anglican missionaries who arrived in the Kingdom of Buganda in 1877 and French Catholic missionaries in 1879. So relatively recent colonization. The British...
Most of sub-Saharan Africa is relatively recent because they didn't have the technology to get there.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
The British government chartered the Imperial British East Africa to negotiate trade agreements in the region. And then we had some religious conflicts destabilizing the region with missionaries, with varying kingdoms, to the point that the British commercial interests were threatened. And what happens when the money is threatened, folks? We colonize. So they colonized by annexing Buganda and then adjoining territories to create the Bugandan Protectorate in 1894. By 1896, they extended that to the kingdoms of Toro and Kole Bunyoro, all mishmashed into what is present-day Uganda. The British installed Bugandan leaders into top positions, which created a lot of problems.
They do this everywhere, by the way.
Yeah. So they decided they were going with the Bugandans, and there's a whole documentary in our Google Docs about the kind of rivalry between Bugandan and Bunyoro kingdoms. Fascinating. So the Ugandans gained independence in 1962 and became a republic in 1963. But they asked to retain their Commonwealth status, which is not uncommon for British colonies. During this
Bermuda
time.
Is still a Commonwealth country. Like,
yeah,
it's not abnormal. I will say too that when we think about Britain, by the way, when you look at the history of colonization, their longest and bloodiest and most obnoxious fight in their mind was India.
Yeah.
And after India got colonization, they kind of let everybody else go. So between India and World War II, they were just like, fine.
Yeah. Yeah. After Indian independence, they were like, just go.
Oh my God, just go away.
It's a big some heavy British energy
like
in Northern
the
Ireland.
American Revolution, like, and then the Indian Revolution. They were like, we're tired of you, all of you upstarts.
Down with, and the empire was crumbling as it is.
Yeah.
So we have independence from 1963, and then, as we said, a whole bunch of coups and dictators until we get to President Museveni, who I read somewhere, I'll have to double check on this. I think they've passed a law where they have extended the term of presidency so he could be president for forever.
Yeah, he's much like many presidents, controversial.
He's an interesting fellow. So that's a wrap on our Uganda, I almost said Buganda, Uganda 101. Is there anything you wanted to highlight as we leave, the things we wanted to talk about or things we learned, Dr. Kristen?
I'm excited that people now know about the gorillas. But also, yeah, like it's hard. I could talk about Uganda forever. Yeah. So I'll pause here.
Pause. The thing that I learned that I wanted to share was that Mama FM was the first woman-led radio station in Africa, and it opened in Kampala in 2001. So watched a fabulous documentary where they were speaking to the women who run Mama FM and why they were so intent about building a station that could broadcast women's voices. So shout out to Mama FM and to all our friends and neighbors in Uganda. And we will see you all tomorrow for our piece of art made by and or about Ugandans. And we'll be talking about the film Call Me Kuchu. And we will see you guys then.
Bye, everybody.